Imagine standing in the middle of a $50 million penthouse in the heart of Manhattan. You look out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sparkling lights of the Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building, feeling like the king of the world. But then you place a marble on the hardwood floor and watch in horror as it starts to roll. It doesn't just roll a little bit, it picks up speed, heading directly toward the corner of the room. You realize with a sinking feeling in your stomach that your luxury palace in the sky isn't level. In fact, the entire $2 billion skyscraper is leaning, and even worse, is slowly descending into the soft soil of New York City. This isn't a scene from a disaster movie. This is the terrifying reality of one of the most expensive engineering failures in modern history. We are talking about a massive vertical monument to human ambition that has quite literally started to sink. And despite the brightest minds in architecture and billions of dollars in attempted fixes, nobody seems able to stop it. Welcome to the world of failing megaprojects, where today we are going inside the tilting tower of Manhattan to figure out how a project this big could go so catastrophically wrong. To understand why a skyscraper would start to sink, we have to look at what lies beneath the pavement of New York City. Most of us think of Manhattan as a solid chunk of granite, and for much of the island, that's true. The bedrock is what allows those iconic narrow towers to reach such staggering heights. But Manhattan's geography is a patchwork. There are pockets of soft clay, ancient swampland, and loose glacial till that behave more like pudding than stone when you put 1 billion pounds of steel on top of them. This particular $2 billion tower was built in one of those treacherous zones. The developers, eager to capitalize on the soaring demand for ultra-luxury real estate, pushed forward with a foundation design that many geologists now say was fundamentally mismatched for the terrain. They didn't go deep enough to hit the bedrock, opting instead for a friction pile system that relies on the soil grabbing the sides of the foundation. It worked during construction, but as soon as the building reached its final height and the interior finishes were added, the physics of gravity began to win the battle against the mud. Now you might be thinking, surely they noticed this during the build. And the answer is a complicated yes and no. In the world of high-stakes New York real estate, minor settling is expected. Every building sinks a few millimeters as it finds its footing. But this tower started doing something different. It started to settle unevenly. One corner of the foundation hit a denser patch of soil, while the other 3 corners continued to plunge downward. This created a tilt. It started as a fraction of an inch, something only high-precision lasers could detect. But as the months turned into years, the tilt became noticeable to the naked eye if you stood far enough away. More importantly, it became noticeable to the residents who started seeing cracks appearing in their expensive plaster walls and hearing the haunting sound of the building's steel frame groaning under the uneven stress. This is where the dream of luxury turned into a living nightmare of litigation and structural uncertainty. Let's talk about the cost of trying to fix a sinking skyscraper. When a normal house settles, you might call a contractor to jack up the floor or inject some foam into the slab. When a $2 billion skyscraper sinks, you are looking at an operation that rivals the original construction in complexity. Engineers have proposed a jacking operation where they would essentially try to lift the entire weight of the building, hundreds of thousands of tons, and insert new support columns underneath. But how do you do that without the whole thing tipping over? The risk of a collapse during the repair is so high that many contractors won't even bid on the job. Meanwhile, the legal fees are mounting. The homeowners, who spent their life savings or their investment portfolios on these units, are suing the developers. The developers are suing the architects. The architects are suing the soil engineers. It is a circular firing squad of blame, all while the building continues its slow, silent journey into the earth. The psychological impact on the residents is something we don't often talk about in megaproject failures. Imagine living 1,000 feet in the air and knowing that your foundation is unstable. Every time the wind blows and the building sways, you wonder if this is the moment the tilt becomes critical. Residents have reported elevators that smell like burning rubber because the shafts are no longer perfectly vertical, causing the cables to rub against the machinery. Doors that used to glide shut now require a heave to close. Windows have spontaneously cracked due to the shifting pressure on the glass frames. This is a $2 billion ghost town in the making, as those who can afford to leave have already evacuated, leaving behind a skeleton crew of security guards and a few stubborn owners who are determined to see their day in court. But why hasn't the city stepped in? Actually, the city of New York is in a delicate position. If they declare the building unsafe, they have to evacuate a major part of the district. If they let it stay, They are gambling with public safety. The Department of Buildings is constantly monitoring the sensors, but the developers have managed to keep much of the data private through legal maneuvers. This lack of transparency is fueling a sense of dread in the neighborhood. People walking by on the sidewalk look up, not with admiration, but with a slight sense of what if. The sinking tower has become a landmark for all the wrong reasons, a symbol of the billionaire's row excess, where the drive for profit outpaced the respect for basic geophysics. Let's look at the fix that was attempted. A few years ago, a team of specialized engineers attempted to stabilize the soil by injecting a concrete-like grout deep into the clay layers. The idea was to turn the soft soil into a solid block of artificial stone. For a few months, it seemed to work. The sensors showed the sinking had slowed down to almost zero. The developers celebrated. The lawyers paused their filings, and it looked like the crisis had been averted. But then, the next rainy season hit. The groundwater levels rose, the pressure under the building shifted, and the grout started to crack. The sinking resumed, this time even faster than before because the grout had created a pivot point that actually increased the tilt. It was a classic example of a solution that only made the problem more complex. The engineering community is watching this with morbid fascination. This tower is a case study in what they call differential settlement. The sheer mathematics of the load distribution are mind-boggling. To stop the sink, they would almost certainly need to drill new piles all the way to the bedrock, which is hundreds of feet down. To do this, they'd have to go through the existing basement, which is already packed with the building's electrical and plumbing systems. It's like trying to perform open-heart surgery on a patient who is currently running a marathon and carrying a heavy backpack. Every move has to be calculated down to the millimeter because a single mistake could lead to a localized failure of the structure. What does this mean for the future of New York's skyline? For decades, the trend has been thinner and taller. But the sinking tower has acted as a cold bucket of water for the industry. Insurance companies are now demanding much more rigorous soil testing before they will underwrite a project. Lenders are hesitating to fund buildings in certain areas of the city. The era of blind confidence in foundation engineering is over. We are seeing a return to more conservative designs. But the tilting titan remains as a reminder of what happens when we ignore the warnings of the earth itself. It is a vertical lesson in humility. But let's go deeper into the soft soil problem. Many people ask, why don't they just use the same technology they used for the Leaning Tower of Pisa? The difference is that the Tower of Pisa is a relatively light, masonry structure that sits on the surface. Stabilizing a modern skyscraper, which is a flexible steel and glass organism, is a completely different challenge. The weight of the Manhattan Tower is so immense that it creates its own pressure bulb in the soil, affecting properties blocks away. There are reports that neighboring buildings are starting to see their own cracks, suggesting that the sinking tower is literally dragging its neighbors down with it. It's a collective engineering crisis that could reshape the legal landscape of urban property rights. The financial fallout is equally staggering. The building's valuation has plummeted. Units that were once listed for $40 million are now struggling to find buyers at $10 million. And even then, getting a mortgage on a sinking property is almost impossible. The banks have essentially blacklisted the address. This means the current owners are stuck. They are paying enormous maintenance fees for a building that is functionally disintegrating and losing value every day. It is the ultimate sunk cost fallacy, played out on a heroic scale. The developers are reportedly near bankruptcy, as the cost of the lawsuits and the failed repairs has drained their reserves. Is there any hope? Some engineers suggest that the building will eventually hit a stable layer of soil and stop on its own. They argue that the soil will eventually compress enough to support the weight. But when will that happen? After the building has tilted so far that the elevators stop working for good. After the plumbing lines are sheared off by the shifting foundation. We are in uncharted territory. No skyscraper of this size has ever had this level of settlement before. Every day is a new experiment in structural resilience. The tower stands as a monument to a specific moment in time, the mid-2010s, when it felt like there were no limits to how much wealth could be concentrated into a single block of Manhattan. It was a time of luxury or nothing, and the engineering was often treated as an afterthought to the marketing. We are now seeing the results of that philosophy. The building isn't just sinking into the dirt, it is sinking into the history books as a cautionary tale of what happens when the ego of a mega project overrides the constraints of reality. It is a 400-meter-tall reminder that no matter how much money you spend, gravity always has the final word. Let's look at the ghost aspect of this. If you walk past the building at night, the lights are mostly off. It isn't just because the wealthy owners are away at their other homes in London or Dubai. It's because the building is becoming functionally uninhabitable for long periods. Every time they try a new repair, they have to shut off the water or the power to entire sections of the tower. The noise of the construction equipment in the lobby and the basement is constant. It feels more like a construction site than a luxury residence. The few people you see coming and going look stressed, like they are trapped in a $2 billion cage. Could they deconstruct it? Some have raised the idea of taking the tower down, floor by floor, to reduce the weight and save the foundation. But the cost of deconstruction in a crowded city like New York is nearly as much as the cost of building it. Plus, who pays for that? The bankrupt developer? The city? The taxpayers? It's a political hot potato that nobody wants to touch. So the building stays, leaning and sinking, a giant glass middle finger to the neighborhood. It is the architectural equivalent of a shipwreck. But instead of sitting at the bottom of the ocean, it's sitting in the middle of Midtown. Another layer to this story is the environmental impact. The amount of concrete and steel poured into this foundation is enough to build a small city. All of that carbon was emitted for a project that might not even last 30 years. In an age of climate consciousness, the sinking tower is a glaring example of unsustainable development. We are wasting massive amounts of energy trying to fix a mistake that should never have happened in the first place. The green features the building was supposed to have, like high-efficiency glass and rainwater recycling, are meaningless if the whole structure has to be scrapped in a few decades. Suppose for a moment that you were the lead engineer on this project. You saw the soil reports, you knew the clay was soft. Did you speak up? Or were you overruled by the developers who wanted a specific height and a specific footprint? These are the questions being asked in the courtrooms today. The email trail of this project is likely a fascinating look into how decisions are made when hundreds of millions of dollars are on the line. Often, the voice of caution is silenced by the voice of profit, and the result is a tilt that can't be untilted, and a sink that can't be unsunk. The tower has also become a morbid tourist attraction. People come from all over to take photos, trying to catch that perfect Pisa angle. There are social media accounts dedicated to tracking the tilt, posting daily updates from laser levels. It's a strange form of ruin porn for the modern age. We are fascinated by the failure of the elite, by the sight of a billion-dollar dream quite literally falling into the mud. It reminds us that even the most powerful people are subject to the same laws of physics as the rest of us. If you go into the sub-basements of the tower, the atmosphere is even more surreal. There are massive steel braces that have been added to the columns, looking like giant orthopedic braces. There are pumps running 24/7 to remove the groundwater that keeps seeping in through the cracks in the foundation. It's a battle against the elements that feels like a scene from a submarine movie. The air is humid and smells of wet concrete. This is the engine room of the sinking tower, and it is a place of constant struggle and band-aid fixes. The tilting titan of Manhattan is a reminder that we must respect the ground we build on. Whether it's a house in the suburbs or a skyscraper in NYC, the foundation is everything. We can spend billions on gold-plated faucets and high-speed elevators, but if we don't get the relationship between the steel and the soil right, it's all for nothing. The skyscraper that started to sink is a lesson for every future engineer and every future dreamer. It says, don't just look up at the stars. Look down at the dirt, because that's what's going to hold you up or let you down. As we look at the skyline of New York today, we see a city that is constantly reinventing itself. New towers are going up even as the sinking one continues to settle. But the lessons of this failure are being woven into the fabric of the new designs. They are using deeper piles, more robust soil stabilization, and more sensors than ever before. The sinking tower might be a failure, but it is also a teacher. It is showing us the limits of our current technology and the importance of humility in the face of nature. The story isn't over yet. Sensors are still clicking, lawyers are still arguing, and the building is still moving. Will it eventually stabilize? Will it be taken down? Or will it remain as it is, a permanent lean in the heart of the world's most famous skyline? Only time and gravity will tell. For now, the $2 billion skyscraper remains a haunting reminder of what happens when we build on a foundation of hubris. It is a mega project failure that we can see from miles away, a vertical shipwreck that nobody can stop, and a story that is still being written, centimeter by painful centimeter, as it sinks slowly into the Manhattan mud. In the end, maybe the sinking tower is the most honest building in New York. It doesn't hide its flaws. It literally leans into them. It shows us the fragility of our modern civilization, the way that even our most permanent monuments are just guests on a planet that is constantly shifting. The next time you are in New York, look for it. Look for the tower that isn't quite straight. Think about the marble rolling across the floor of the penthouse. Think about the billions of dollars being swallowed by the clay. And remember that in the world of megaprojects, the biggest mistake isn't dreaming too big, it's forgetting to check what's under your feet. The sinking Manhattan Tower is a monument to that truth, and as long as it stands, it will continue to tell its silent, sagging story to anyone who is willing to look up and notice the tilt. The silence of the building is perhaps its most profound feature. In a city of noise, the sinking tower sits in a hushed state of crisis. It's a slow-motion catastrophe that doesn't explode, it just settles. It is a reminder that some failures aren't sudden. They are gradual. They are the result of thousands of small decisions that eventually add up to a $2 billion lien. As the sun sets over the Hudson and the light reflects off the tilted glass, the tower looks almost perfect. But we know the truth. We know about the marble. We know about the clay. And we know that somewhere, deep in the dark soil of Manhattan, the Earth is still reclaiming what was once its own. The sinking tower is a failed megaproject, a structural nightmare, and a vertical warning for the ages. It can't be stopped, and it certainly can't be ignored. It is the tower that began to sink, and it is still going down.